counties in the state of Florida and in the United States. We have roughly 15, give or take, large dairies supplying dairy throughout the U.S. and in the state of Florida. Larson Dairy and Burnham Dairy were conducted by two independent investigators, both armed investigators, okay? Basically what we did was we went into the Okeechobee area and picked these names out of a hat. Again, similar to the Larson Dairy, no evidence of cruelty came out of the Burnham Dairy. There were no reports of animal cruelty that came into ARM or made its way to our organization from another independent organization or government department. So these properties, this property, Burnham Dairy, was on the same level as Larson Dairy, with no complaints of animal cruelty in any kind. It was not targeted for any specific reason other than being a dairy. So we actually were hired in the Burnham Dairy before we were hired in Larson Dairy. We spent our goal for both operations was a 3-month time period. The 3 months was actually our goal for Burnham, and we achieved it. Many of you know, our goal wasn't met with Larson, it was cut short, which is why the abuse in every division of Larson didn't come to fold for our investigation, okay? And there are reasons behind that. I'll get into that actually at the end of the press conference and educate everyone on a little bit more of details on the Larson issue. There's a lot of questions that have arisen on as far as the sheriff, county commissioners of Okeechobee County, talking about our strategy, going against our strategy at Larson Farm, why this, why that. We will get into that, and I'll try to address it the best that I possibly can. Burnham Dairy is a bit different than Larson Dairy in size. This is a small family farm, okay? It is run by family members. They are on site. This is the type of dairy where people purchase their products from thinking the cows are being treated better, more humane, right? Automatically, a lot of people throughout the world think that the more cows and the more industry-like of an operation, the more cruelty, and that at times is true. In this case, the cruelty is extreme. The small family farm environment, the cows are living in extreme misery. It is a torturous operation in every level possible, in every area possible, in every division possible for this dairy. Who is the investigator that went undercover in the Burnham Dairy? This is not your typical animal activist with something to prove, to badmouth the farm industry or the dairy industry. We have no connection. This person has no connection. This person is actually a war veteran serving and doing tours in Iraq and Afghanistan. He is not an animal activist, and we put him in the Burnham Dairy basically to show the world what is happening behind closed doors at this company, okay? Upon day one of the Burnham Dairy investigation, there were signs of abuse, very similar to Larson. It was hand slaps to the animals' faces, maybe a punch or a kick. As the time went on, our employees started seeing worse abuse. Very similar to the Larson case, our employee and our investigator was hired as a milker. He could have been hired as anything on this property, being hired in the birthing barn, as a feeder, as an animal feeder in the calf area, taking care of the downer cows, inseminating cows. There's a host of positions that we were prepared and this person was trained for prior to going out and interviewing at Burnham Dairy. And he just so happened to be hired as a milker. The milking barn is a catastrophe for animals and for people alike. Covered in feces, the floors, the walls, the flooring itself doesn't have a non-slip flooring to it. Our investigator himself was slipping all over the place for the 3 months that he was undercover there and injuring himself. Employees were slipping and falling. Imagine cattle with a hoof-like foot trying to get into the milking barn. Basically what they are is they are herded from the living quarters and the holding quarters up a very steep ramp that is slick and dangerous for humans and animals. They go into the milking barn. Once they go into that milking barn, the floor is extremely slick, okay? Sir? 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 The floor is extremely slick in the milking barn. The cows are beaten. To begin with, it was with a hand to get into milking position in the milking barn and in the milking parlor. First, it was with a hand. Then, as time went on, the towels came out, small towels that were wet. And if anyone has ever been whipped with a wet towel when you were younger playing games with your friends, you know how it feels. It is even for a cow's hide and their skin, it's extremely painful. As the weeks went on, the devices got longer. 2 towels, wet, the animals being whipped and beaten with longer devices. As time went on, as weeks go on, which is why we spend so much time undercover in particular operations to get their true ongoings. Then the lines came out from the workers. Towels wet with lines, cat o' nine tail-like lines tied to the end, whipping the animals in the faces, in the private parts, in the udders, in the legs. As time went on, the devices got longer. These particular items that I'm talking about and showing you are from the Burnham Farms. These were the exact devices used to torture the animals at the Burnham Dairy that I'm showing you. The lines got longer, wet towels with heavy lines on the end of them. 15-foot, extremely heavy knotted lines were then used to beat and whip the animals in the milking parlor. Then the belts came out after roughly 2 months of undercover investigation. Now, our undercover investigator was good friends with the managers. We were good friends with all the workers. And these came out with metal buckles. The cows being beat in the face and in the private parts with metal buckled belts. A full-grown man using all of his might with this belt on a daily basis, on an hourly basis, on almost a minute basis, beating every single cow that entered that milking parlor. Remember, these cows are milked 3 times a day. They have 2 crews and 2 shifts that milk these cows, day and night, 7 days a week, possibly over 305 days per year. The animals' living quarters, where they're being brought from into the milking barn, are horrific. They are littered with feces. In some of the barns, the cows are stepping in up to 4 inches of muck, of manure, 24 hours a day, unless they're in the milking parlor. To get them out of that environment, to get them out of the holding areas where they're living, they are beaten, they're whipped, they're tormented, they're yelled at. To get them up the ramp, they're beaten, they're whipped, they're tormented. To get them into the milking parlor, they're into milking position, they're beat, they're tormented, they're whipped. Could you imagine, all of you as cameramen and reporters and your viewers, having a life spent with misery and torture, producing, in all 4, producing a product for people. People, on the most part, that are uneducated to where their food and their dairy is coming from, because a face is being twisted and turned by the dairy industry as far as how these cows are being treated, how they're being kept, and I'll get into that. Understand that our employee was a milker, and he had a designated position to actually milk these cows. To get out of that milking barn and find his way into other areas of this operation, to see basically what's going on in the birthing area, the housing area, the calf areas. He basically had to go in there on his off days, on his off hours. This is an investigator that was working 15 hours a day, 7 days a week, all to educate the public. That is it. Many times when he went in, specifically to the calf area, managers would approach him and ask him what he was doing. All he was doing was basically helping, at times, feed the poor babies bottles. They did not want him there. Why? Because of the neglect, of the abuse to the babies. They trusted him as a worker, as a dairy worker, but the abuse was so bad there, the conditions were so bad, they didn't want any employees there unless they were very seasoned and there for years and years. In the milking parlor itself, if the employees didn't move the cows fast enough into milking position, the managers would come in, and they would hold types of seminars. They would hold demonstrations themselves and show the employees how to properly beat and torture the animals to get them into the milking parlor and out of the milking parlor as fast as they possibly could. Why? To get the next group in, to produce more milk and more profit for this small family farm dairy. The animals in the milking parlor were so exhausted, they could barely walk. Many animals and the cows were actually going down and falling down with the milkers hooked up to them at their milking stations, not being able to get up. They were being beaten, they were being tortured to get up, which they could barely stand, to get them out of that milking parlor to make room for the next group of milking cows. The Downer cow area. The Downer cow area was right near the milking parlor because, well, that's where a lot of the cows were going down and they could no longer stand. They were being dragged out of the milking parlor. They were being dragged with tractors over to the Downer cow area and left in mud, feet of mud. And that's where they would sit and that's where they would lay until they died on their own. We never once saw a veterinarian at the Burnham Dairy. Not once was an animal properly medically treated, and we saw some extremely sad and abused sick animals. The calf area, which is going to radiate throughout the world. I truly do not believe that a calf area so neglectful and disgusting has ever been filmed on a dairy or any farm, ever. We started getting into the calf area roughly a month to 2 months after being hired, and what we saw was shocking. The calves in small pens, roughly 4 by 6 in diameter, no shelter. Most of the shaders, remember, that let in rainwater, which aren't proper roofings, were ripped after years of use, never replaced. We were there in August, September. Imagine being put in a cage in the direct sunlight with no shade, being a newborn baby. Our temperatures from our thermometers, by putting a thermometer down in the sun, in the direct sun, were exceeding 120 degrees in the summertime. Our thermometers and thermostats we would put on the calf cages, and it topped out at the Burnham Dairy at 109 degrees with no shade. Imagine not being able to get shade. These animals were seizing, they were dying by the number. The animals were seizing, they were going into convulsions from the heat, from the direct sunlight. The mortality rate was monstrous. We were guesstimating in the summer months and beyond, and this particular dairy, a death rate of possibly 40%. There were bodies everywhere. The calves were living with the dead. Newborn calves were actually purposely penned. They were put in these 6x4 enclosures with dead corpses of calves that recently died. We are not certain why. Was it for company? Was it for comfort, for the calf to nuzzle against? We do not know. You know, the dairy industry prides itself on separating calf and mother for disease purposes, for disease control. What in the world are they thinking, putting live dairy calves, female dairy calves that are going to be raised for dairy calves, to produce milk and food products in the state of Florida and the United States, with diseased, dead animals? It is incredible and incredibly inhumane. The babies, it was basically a sea of cages at the Burnham Dairy. We're guesstimating hundreds of babies in these cages, in these makeshift cages, suffering. The babies would not eat. They would not take a bottle. Remember, they are pulled the first second they are born from their mothers. So they have to eat. They were trying to bottle feed. They wouldn't take the bottle. They want their mother. So what were they doing? The workers in the calf areas were taking 3-foot rods, steel rods, and jamming these rods, untrained workers, not veterinarians, jamming these rods down the throats of these newborn calves and force feeding them. Many times, the rods going into possibly the lung area and drowning the calves. The calves were dying from this way of feeding. Extremely torturous. If you look at the video, you will see how uncomfortable and painful it was for these babies. Once these animals are dead, which occurred on a daily basis, these calves were living with the dead, as I stated. They were being brought into a central portion of the dairy, which was basically an illegal dump area, which is a misdemeanor arrestable offense in the state of Florida. When we entered the dump area, we found hundreds of corpses, both old and new. Skeletal remains that from what it looked like, had been there for years. From satellite imagery, going back years, we looked at this area, and it was an active dump site years and years ago. This wasn't a one-time thing. Because they couldn't bury the corpses because of the water table was too high, or any other ridiculous excuse. This was common practice at the Burnham Dairy, to dump these animals in basically a wetland area of the dairy itself. Running streams, running water were going through the dumped area, possibly going into our canals, possibly depleting into Lake Okeechobee, which possibly is going into the Atlantic Ocean. We have seen issues in the past from pollution from the agriculture industry, polluting Lake Okeechobee and going and being depleted into the Atlantic Ocean. Is that what's happening here? Are they contributing to that? It's a possibility. In the cold weather, in the rainstorms, and I am not talking about any type of hurricanes that Florida has seen or tropical storms. I am talking about a regular, typical rainstorm like we've had for the past few days, hitting the calf area. Remember, no shelter. It's in a flooded zone. The calves are actually in a flooded, improper drainage zone. The calves are living in inches and inches of water, some of them up to a foot. Could you imagine a newborn baby barely being able to stand, being purposely put and left in a flooded out cage where they cannot sit down? These babies are trying to sleep, trying to keep their noses above water from drowning. And I'm not talking about one or two, I'm talking about hundreds. How incredibly disgusting. With the managers, us videoing the managers in these areas as the new bottles are being put for feeding, and those cages being closed, and these babies in up to a foot of water, knowing that they are. Randy Burnham himself, the owner of the Burnham Dairy, is on this dairy daily. He works there. He's at times a laborer. He is always in this calf area. He truly knows what is going on, and this is not a one-time issue. This has been going on for years and/or decades. Why has this not gone public before? Why has no one reported these disgusting atrocities and abuse? Because no one has ever gone there that hasn't been interrelated with this dairy. The inspectors. Who in the world is inspecting the animal cruelty on these farms? The Florida Department of Agriculture, the FDA, the USDA, the environmental departments? All of these departments are going to dairies, including the Burnham Dairy, and inspecting the equipment. Is the milk being stored at the right temperature? Is the equipment clean? Is the runoff going into the holding ponds properly? That is all that I'm seeing while we were looking at the guidelines for these industries. Not once did we see a governmental department commenting on the animals, on the animal cruelty. How are the animals being treated in this property and in the dairy industry in general? Was this being left to be monitored by the dairy industry itself, by the farm owners, by the dairy farm owner himself? How incredibly irresponsible of government to do that. And it shows. It shows at the Burnham Dairy, because over decades, we now see the incredible signs of abuse and neglect. I am a very seasoned undercover investigator. I have been undercover constantly for the past 10 years, and I've seen some of the worst abuse worldwide. I've been into 8 countries, just about every state in the United States, and all over the state of Florida. And as far as long-term abuse and suffering and neglect, this is one of the worst, most disgusting cases I've ever seen. And I'm ashamed to be a dairy consumer for as long as I was, because I was contributing to this without knowing it. So why did we go undercover in the Larson Dairy? Why did we go undercover in the Burnham Dairy? To put a true spotlight on the dairy industry, what they've been hiding for so long, what these so-called experts have been hiding, giving you false statements. It is ridiculous. It is unethical. It's disgusting. So what are basically we expecting? Understand, this document was just given and delivered this morning to the sheriff of Okeechobee County. 2 weeks ago, we sent out reports. What we basically did for the Burnham Dairy investigation, we basically looked at every department that had enforcement on the Burnham Dairy, and we sent them evidence with strong letters and documentation telling them exactly what was going on and exactly how their agency could take enforcement on this dairy. And where did those letters go? The FDA, the USDA, the Florida Department of Agriculture, environmental departments, the EPA, the DEP, county environmental, building, zoning, neighborhood compliance. This property is a catastrophe safety-wise for workers and animals. The building codes, as an ex-property developer and builder, the building codes on this property were a complete nightmare. Open electrical sockets and wiring, live wiring all over the place, next to water. The workers could have easily electrocuted themselves and were killed. The animals had so many injuries, bloodied eyes that had never been treated, from poking themselves from sharp metal or wood protruding out of a newly fallen building. The hazards on this property were extreme. So why didn't the local sheriff receive this packet in a timely fashion? Prior to going public with either Larson or Burnham, we met as a group and discussed the possibility of the local sheriff, the local elected sheriff in Okeechobee County, having friendships and personally knowing the owners of these dairies. We have lived and learned. We've made this mistake in the past, and our investigations have been blown by taking our evidence to the wrong people, to the wrong departments. It's happened in Miami, it's happened all over the country. And it's negatively affected our cases, which have negatively affected the animals that we're trying to assist. We had, days before going public with the Larson Dairy, we had a meeting with the state attorney, with multiple assistant state attorneys, and showed them the evidence. They were horrified. We brought up the possibility of the elected sheriff having personal relationships with Jacob Larson and the Larson family. And she looked at me and said, it's possible. It could be a concern. So I am going to give you 2 deputies that I am very good friends with, that I trust to take your case to. We took that case to them prior to having the press conference last Thursday for the Larson Dairy, and everything was perfect, and they were very positive on our case. Things took a downward spiral once the elected sheriff of Okeechobee County got involved. Very quickly, he held a press conference, and what was one of the first things out of his mouth? Support for the Larson family. Support for the people that we were bringing him evidence on that may be guilty of misdemeanor or felony offenses. Wow, how incredibly shocking that was. To quote him in his first press conference, "The Larsons I've known for 30 years, 3 generations. They would have not been involved in anything like this." This is before he saw the evidence. The actual evidence, all of the files, remember the 4-minute clip that was released to you and to the public last week wasn't evidence in a case. That was for education. The evidence is brought by myself or the investigator or someone from ARM to the Sheriff's Department. That consists of hundreds of hours of footage, which they are going to have to go through. If you think these are what you saw on video last week were the only people committing crimes at the Larson Dairy, you're wrong. If you think all of the abuse we were able to condense in a 4-minute video it is untrue. Of course. It was a sample. So for the sheriff himself to go public with such a statement when Jacob Larson could basically be possibly arrested for animal cruelty is incredible. We have now very little faith in the system, in the legal system in Okeechobee County because of the sheriff's statements and because of the county commissioner's statements. And I will quote Brian Culpepper, who interrupted, by the way, a very tranquil demonstration in front of one of the Larson Dairy farms last weekend. Very aggressively, he was looking at supporters of animals and saying, "You people are sick. Every one of you are just lunatics." This is coming from a public official, an elected public official. I go on. "I'm a large supporter of the Larsons and a longtime friend." This is coming from a governmental official in Okeechobee County that we are handing a criminal case to involving this family. I go on. "The Larsons were targeted. They were set up because Mr. Larson has built an empire in the dairy industry." What an incredibly ridiculous statement by a public official. This is basically saying because you're a business owner, and if your business is large enough and you bring in enough money, you're not capable of committing a crime, of an offense, that your employees are not capable of committing a crime or an offense. What in the world is going on with leaders in Okeechobee County? And how long has this been going on for? This is just a small dairy investigation. How wrapped around the agriculture industry are the leaders in Okeechobee County? They are admitting this themselves prior to seeing proper evidence. Our investigator brought the Burnham Dairy file, our investigator took all of our video yesterday, finally, to the Sheriff's Department. And we walked into the detective's office, and what did we see in the corner of the detective's office? Steel construction rebar that was seized from the Larson Dairy. Interesting. Going through the video very quickly, and remember, I have gone through possibly a quarter, if not maybe a half of the video that was collected at the Larson Dairy. And what did I find? Very quickly, a picture of Jacob Larson in the milking barn addressing the very same people that were videoed rebarring and torturing the animals with a high voltage cattle prod in his hand. How interesting. What would Jacob Larson be doing with a cattle prod in his hand in the milking barn. Listen, the truth is going to come out, okay? There is a thing called testimony. Our investigator that was undercover at the Larson Dairy has not yet sat with the Sheriff's Department, and for good reason. Reason being just the statements alone. We're worried, actually, giving this and any other case to the Sheriff's Department. I do want to say, from working with so many law enforcement agencies over the years, I'm hopeful that things are going to take a turn for the better in our relationship with the elected sheriff himself. Now, the elected sheriff has been extremely critical on myself and our investigator and our whole organization for the length of time that we were undercover at the Larson Dairy. Understand, we are undercover investigators. We are not there for a day. As many of you know, reporting on our cases over the years, over almost 10 years, we go undercover at times for 6 months, a year. We are no different than any governmental investigative unit with any law enforcement division. Organized crime, undercover narcotics. These units are trained to go undercover, as we are, to get as much evidence as they possibly can get prior to ending the investigation. The Larson Dairy has almost 8 locations. It is a monster of a company. We had reports of abuse all over in every inch of that organization and that company and their standalone barns. It was our job to get into those barns. Our job to seek out evidence of animal cruelty other than in the milking parlor. This takes time. Proper relationships have to be made. The true cruelty, as in Burnham Dairy, remember, they started with towels. They ended with steel belt buckle, whip-like devices because of their relationship grew with our investigator. They got more comfortable. It is how undercover work is worked. And who in the world would take us serious if one cow was whipped and we took it to the owner, Jacob Larson, or even we took it to law enforcement? They would laugh and say, you know what? That investigator had one bad day. He had a bad night, he had a fight with his girlfriend, and he took it out on the cow. We're sorry. No, it is not how to build a case. The reason why the state attorney's office in Florida likes to work with our organization so much is because how we build a case. It's very solid, with no loopholes, and we bring them evidence and we bring them charges. Now, to finish, the experts over the past week that have talked about the dairy industry and that what happened at the Larson Dairy was uncommon. It was not standard practice throughout the industry. How interesting it is that the Animal Recovery Mission picked names out of the hat and were just lucky enough to get hired in 2 dairies in the same county, less than a mile from one another. The Burnham Dairy is just about a mile from one of the Larson locations. And we found extreme abuse. Now let me quote some of the industry experts. The University of Michigan that went on film this week, saying that the University of Michigan, the University of Florida, and the National Milkers Producers Federation all stated cows that are abused in the milking parlor will not drop their milk. I can assure you that is incorrect. The milkers that were in both of these milking barns, in Larson and Burnham, were our employees. There was no shortage of milk coming out of these cows. There was not one complaint of a manager saying production is low. What is the problem? The managers themselves taking part in the abuse. Remember that the more milk that they produce in these milking barns, the more milkers make. They make bonuses on a monthly basis for the more milk that comes out of these animals. So these statements that these industry experts are saying that it's impossible for cows to be tortured in the milking parlor because they're not going to produce milk, it is laughable. It is laughable. Now we're seeing 2 farms right next to one another. Let me go on. Dr. Karen Jordan, and she's the head veterinarian for the National Milk Producers Federation. Here's what she said. The separation of mother and calf is much like putting a human baby into daycare. Mother cows get nasty. Cows get dirty and stomped on. It's inappropriate for leaving mother and baby together. How incredible. This is a statement from a licensed doctor, a medical doctor, saying that it's improper for a baby to be left, a newborn baby to be left with its mother. This is how the dairy industry is protecting its image, by statements like this. Have you seen the babies at the Burnham Dairy? Do they look clean? Do they look well fed? Do they look well cared for? It is incredible that these industry experts are coming forward and handing us a load of shit, ridiculous excuses. As a citizen of the state of Florida and of this country, I am humiliated, I'm embarrassed, I am, that this has been hidden for so long. You drive by a milk truck out there, and there's a cartoon-charactered sketch of a dairy cow with a smile on her face. It is incredible. Look at our video. This video wasn't doctored. This is true video and ongoings of dairy farms, of the Burnham Dairy and of the Larson Dairy. And it is extreme. People in the public, even cameramen and producers, can barely even watch it. It is disgusting. What is the outcome? What are we expecting for the Burnham Dairy and this investigation? Number one, who are they supplying their milk to? Publix. They are supplying their dairy to the Publix Corporation through Southeast Milk. Southeast Milk, as we all now know, is a co-op owned by dairy farmers. Southeast Milk is picking up 100% of the dairy coming from the Burnham Dairy, taking it to their plants, who are then trucking it to many companies, including one of their largest clients, the Publix Corporation. We are requesting, as they did with Larson, to stop purchasing dairy from the Burnham Dairy. We are requesting that Southeast Milk, stemming from our investigation, stop picking up dairy from the Burnham Dairy in Okeechobee, Florida. We are requesting that the public look good and hard at what they're consuming. They now know how these cows are being treated for their dairy products, right? That milk they eat, that cheese they're consuming. This is how it's being produced, and there is no excuse for it. It is standard-wide. I can pick any dairy in the United States that is supplying dairy to the public, and I can show you similar abuse. I will prove the industry experts wrong every single time. Due to the conditions, due to the extreme conditions of this dairy, we are demanding that the Burnham Dairy be closed for life. These people do not and cannot and have shown they do not know how to operate with animals. They do not know how to treat animals humanely. The environmental impacts from the Burnham Dairy alone, the flooding, the feces, the dead corpses all over this 560-acre site is extreme. Remember, when you go out, if you have representatives that go out to the Burnham Dairy, that they have been well in advance given time to clean this property up over the past 2 weeks. They've had visits, and they have open investigations from the DEP, from the County of Okeechobee. Federal and special agents are coming in from Washington, D.C., from the EPA. This is a big deal. We are requesting, if they have the authority, that the Florida Department of Agriculture pull a license for dairy to come out of from the Burnham Dairy. This place is filthy. The animals are covered in feces. Their udders are covered in feces. They have a long track record with the Florida Department of Agriculture of sanitary violations, of their milking parlor being filthy. They have been warned. They have been warned. This is a sad place. I'm glad that we have gone public with this. Understand the 9+ minute video that we've gone public with is just the starters. We have over 1,000 hours of footage of abuse, of neglect, that will be handed to law enforcement for their criminal investigation. As far as the investigator for this case, myself, I was part of the investigator team. I was there. I saw it. I videoed. I'm a witness, and I have testimony that will be heard, hopefully in court. Hopefully this gets to court. I am hoping, as an investigator and the head of the Animal Recovery Mission, that public officials, especially I'm accenting on the elected sheriff of Okeechobee, doesn't have a relationship with Mr. Burnham as that he does with Mr. Larson. Because if that's the case, this case is in trouble, and so are the animals. Thank you.
Thanks, Richard. Just to be clear again, you're alleging that the sheriff in Okeechobee County has a relationship with the Larson family.
Well, he admitted.
Okay.
I'm quoting him.
Okay, and is refusing to investigate, or can you kind of clarify what's happening exactly with the Larson case?
He hasn't refused to investigate by any means. What is worrying me as an investigator, as a seasoned investigator, is his relationship with that family. You don't have to be a genius to figure out that he may be biased in this case.
So do you feel that because of the cozy relationship, just not that, but I believe you said Burnham is friendly with government officials?
Well, I'm hoping that he's not, but I'm glad you asked that. And very quickly, Randy Burnham, who is the owner of the Burnham Dairy Farm, is a board member and part of the Florida Dairy Farmers Association. He is actually on the cover of their website, and that is him front and center. This is the owner of the Burnham Dairy.
But because of that, do you fear that the proper criminal investigation can't take place, or if any of these people will be held accountable for animal abuse?
I am hopeful that even if this case stays with the County Sheriff's Department of Okeechobee, I am hopeful that arrests will be made by the workers. The sheriff, again, without looking at the evidence, has already stated he's doubtful that charges will arise for Jacob Larson. I'm thinking it's because of his personal relationship, because the sheriff hasn't, nor his deputies or detectives have seen the evidence in this case yet.
So you don't think that the owners, Jacob, Burnham, and Mr. Larson, will face criminal charges because of their relationship with the local government?
That's correct. And I can tell you from investigating a lot of farms in the state of Florida, even if these owners weren't present, we showed definitive ongoing abuse on a daily basis, they're liable. We have farmers in educated slaughterhouses that we investigated in Palm Beach and in Miami-Dade, actually up to 140 farms that we investigated and closed with law enforcement. Many of those farm owners weren't even present on site and are in prison right now. They did jail time because they controlled the employees. They were responsible. So you're telling me Jacob Larson, who is at Barn 5, where our video was shot, who is in the milking barn itself on a regular basis, isn't liable for his workers? Were there cameras set up in the milking barn? He had 5-foot steel rebar in the milking barn itself, knowing that it was in there. He didn't have enough common sense to say, this rebar is for a different purpose, and it may be. But with a frustrated, uneducated employee, could he possibly take that rebar to one of my animals?
And you think this is industry-wide?
I don't think that, ma'am. I know it. This is industry-wide. Every investigation on a dairy farm throughout the country has come back with such disgusting, ridiculous abuse. Not one, and I know all the undercover investigators in a lot of these organizations, not one time did they come back and say, wow, that's a really well-run place, humane, I'm leaving, turn on my back, and taken off. I, as an investigator, have investigated illegal slaughterhouses. I have done that to illegal slaughterhouses. I've seen conditions better than a factory farm. These people are doing the best that they can, handling the animals, feeding the animals, treating the animals. And I've turned my back. I am publicly saying that right now. I've turned my back and I have left because they did the best that they possibly could. and I knew it was better than a factory farm.
You've asked Publix
Southeast
to-
Milk has placed them on probation for farms.
Okay, probationary status is fine. I want forever status. What Southeast Milk is doing is they want this to deplete from the news. They want this to go away very quietly. And in months, they will restate that dairy. I am asking right now, as I speak, as an investigator and a person that investigated, in part, Burnham Dairy, I want them shut down for life. For life. In animal cruelty cases in the state of Florida, when animals are tortured, and I have a lot of experience here, when animals are tortured, those offenders should be arrested, and those animals should be seized legally by the state of Florida and put in the care of sanctuaries or rescues. So that is what I'm asking for today. I'm asking for the right and just thing to occur, for this place to be shut down, for the proper arrest to be made, and for these dairy cows and these babies to be turned over to a rescue or a sanctuary so they can live out their life in peace.
Is there any reason to think that the remaining milk on the shelves of Publix comes from dairies that are any better?
No. No.
Richard, have you seen the statement from the Burnham family at all?
I have not.
Apparently, we are appalled to see those images. While some of them reflect our struggle in the face of historic severe weather in Florida, we also can't deny that others reflect the failure of our farm policies and management.
Okay.
Taking immediate action regarding our employees.
Of course. Understand that the majority of the footage that was taken was not through extreme weather as far as tropical storms or hurricanes, as I stated prior to you making that statement. The babies that you see in the cages didn't arise from Hurricane Irma. It didn't arise from a tropical storm. This is from a rainstorm. These babies were sitting in a flooded out zone for years, possibly decades. That statement is typical. It is typical of a dairy farmer. It's typical of the dairy industry. It's a way out for them. I can assure you, the owners, I was talking myself to Randy Burnham going in right next to the milking parlor, hearing the screams of animals, hearing the screams of the workers, and hearing the beating from the devices. Remember, Burnham in that statement used management. We are appalled. Managers were holding seminars, training exhibitions on how to beat the animals in the milking parlor. It is ridiculous.
Are there more investigations going on right now in Okeechobee?
The Animal Recovery Mission has roughly 20 ongoing investigations. I can't comment on any open investigations. I wish that I could. But it would put the lives of our investigators in jeopardy and our cases and the animals that we're trying to help.
Is there more to come though on the?
Well, there are of course always going to be more to come. Will there be more to come in Florida? I am not certain. We just started our factory farm division, so we are looking into other areas, other industries to investigate. Yeah.
You touched on this a bit, but when I spoke to the Larsons and also the Okeechobee sheriff, both criticized you. They said your investigations ended in August, but yet you didn't bring the accusations until now, and they're alleging that, oh, we could have saved these cows from further abuse. Why exactly did it take the several months before you went public with your info?
First of all, I myself and a few other employees have to go through the footage. Okay, I didn't even know, because we have so many investigations going on all over the world in a lot of different states in the U.S., we have footage coming in from all over the place. We as investigators have to properly go through and shift through all of this footage. The reports have to be written. The cases have to be totally complete prior to going public. Also, with the Larson case, that is an interesting case. Again, as I stated, we were worried to take this to the sheriff until the report was complete, until the video was complete, and until, in part, the video was in the hands of the press to educate the public, before it was suppressed by his office to protect his friend, Jacob Larson. Jacob Larson, actually the day after the Hurricane Irma, our investigator had an improper shirt on, and it was a bit too tight. And Jacob Larson saw a bulge coming from his chest. And he asked our investigator, "Is that a camera that you're wearing?" And our investigator said, "No, sir, I don't know what you're talking about." And he quickly left. It was a camera. He was an undercover investigator at the Larson at the Larson Dairy Farm. and just didn't go back and abandoned his job, and that's where our investigation ended. The reason being, for the time, is that the amount of requests from employees and former employees and contractors coming into us saying abuse is coming in and is going on at other dairy farms owned by the Jacob Larsons. We tried to get other undercover investigators hired for months, unsuccessful. Because now the guard was up by Jacob Larson, that undercover investigators possibly may be going into the Larson Dairy looking for evidence. So it was very hard for us to get rehired in the Larson Dairy, and we were never successful, which is the reason behind the time, okay? Larson Dairy, Jacob Larson was extremely worried that there was someone possibly videoing covertly in his barn. He was worried enough to send us a letter through his lawyer. And this is a demand stop letter, a very threatening letter, not to release any footage to the public, well, or face lawsuit or arrest by his good friend, possibly the elected sheriff. Now, why would a company owner be worried enough to send out a demand stop letter on a young kid who may or may not be videoing in his business? This is a very threatening letter that any of you can have a copy of.
And this was.
This
sent
shows
before
guilt.
you-
This is a mission of guilt.
And this was sent before you released the video? As though he suspected it was you?
This was dated September 29th, 2017, and is recorded via certified mail. I have 15 copies.
In your, anybody doing right, anybody going by the book in the dairy industry? I mean, can you point to any examples of?
Honestly, not. I can't. I mean, I wish I could, but these are the first two dairies that we've been undercover in, okay, that we've stopped investigations in. So, but looking at other undercover dairy investigations that have been done throughout the country, in just about every state, the abuse that I have seen is extreme, and that is why I personally picked the dairy industry to go undercover in to start off our factory farm division because of abuse. And guess what? Our first two investigations, I was right.
How many more dairy farms are there in that area?
Roughly 15, give or take. We have over 130 dairy farms in the state of Florida. And remember, Randy Burnham is on the board of directors of basically the governing body that oversees the dairy industry in the state. Some of the wording on the website could have came straight from Randy, and I quote, "Treating animals with respect and compassion is part of everyday farmers' heritage. Simply put, no dairy farmer can succeed without healthy and content cows. Farmers recognize good animal welfare practices lead to production in high quality, safe, and wholesome milk. And they're consistently seeking ways to improve the comfort of their animals." Do we see that at the Burnham Dairy? There's abuse everywhere, not just one little area. So the statement that you gave me that the Burnham Dairy owner, Randy Burnham, made this morning, if it was one small little area of his dairy, that would be one thing, okay? But I have 90% of his staff, including his managers, on film beating and torturing the animals. Every division, the calf areas, the milking areas, the housing areas, everywhere. It is absurd. And it does not stem from any type, and I will go on the stand, it does not stem from any storm or any hurricane.
Besides Publix, everybody knows that name, but do they also supply like Winn-Dixie?
It's possible, it is possible that Southeast Milk is supplying Winn-Dixie. I cannot go public with that because I don't have proof. The only company that I have proof of is Publix.
When was this investigation finished?
This investigation was finished in mid-October.
And that's when the undercover operative got out of there? in
Correct.
October?
Correct.
Does public know about this new case, or is finding out as the rest of the world right now? Does public know about this case?
Okay, Publix was sent a letter as well, just as they were with the Larson case. We also spoke to Publix. Publix actually sent us to their purchasing department, who purchases goods. They didn't even have the courtesy of bringing us to a supervisor or a head officer. We would like to sit with Publix so we can try to reform this industry. We want to make reform through government, But the quickest way to make reform, especially for the CAF areas, is through industry. They have the power to put regulations on the farms where they're getting their products from.
You want Larson shut down too, or just Burnham?
Larson is permanent. Larson is shut down as of right now by the Milkers Federation, something or other,
Okay, and.
temporarily,
Have you
until
heard-
investigation.
Have you heard back from USDA or any federal regulators?
USDA we've not heard back from, nor the FDA. The only, remember, letters went out weeks ago on the burn. Environmental departments are the only ones that have contacted us.
Do you think that these government agencies are as guilty as these people that are implementing all this abuse in the cows because they don't follow or because they don't want modernization? What do you think about that?
Yeah, I don't think they're as guilty as many believe, because government agencies call and make appointments